Hey film fans, what you're about to see is this week's episode of my regular Week in Movies feature, where I talk about all kinds of movie news from Hollywood, sometimes international. It's personal stories, production stories, distribution stories, what's happening in the studios, what's happening with stars, and anything else that kind of tickles my fancy. I really just pick sort of 4, 5, 6 stories that week and riff on them a little bit. Normally, this is reserved only for my patrons over at my Patreon page, which you can see right there. But I thought I'd put up this week's here on my regular YouTube page, just so you could get a flavor of what's going on over there. If you like this and you'd like to see more, hop over to my Patreon page. It's just $1 a month and you'll have access to these videos dating back to January and going forward every week, or almost every week. I also put up some other reviews over there. This summer I reviewed the whole series, The Offer, about the making of The Godfather, and I've got more things in store as well. So if you watch this and you like this and you want to see more, head on over to my Patreon. Either way, please enjoy it, and I'll see you soon with more What Makes This Film Great and other movies on my regular YouTube channel. Thanks, everybody. Hello film fans and hello film patrons. This is Movie Talk with Aaron Hunter. I'm Aaron Hunter, and this is the Week in Movies for the week ending the 11th of November. What have we got for this week? Following up on a Paul Haggis story that I've been talking about a little bit on and off for the last couple months anyway. A kind of sad, we'll see where it goes, Warren Beatty story. Some stuff about DC. The sexiest man alive, and then some sad illness and RIP news. So let's get into all of that. But first, a little bit of personal news. Just yesterday, on the 10th, I launched my book officially, finally. I got a copy right here on Polyplat. Let's see. Polyplat, Hollywood Production Design and Creative Authorship. This was actually published last February, late January, February, and I was meant to have a launch in June, but it didn't work out. So it was a great event. It was at the Irish Film Institute, which is interesting because the IFI, which is, if you don't know, if you're not from Ireland, is also one of the country's main art cinemas. It's an archive. It's sort of the center of the Irish film promotional and exhibition industry. But they host the Oscar, the Academy Award, for Josie McCavan, who was an Irish production designer who won an Oscar for her work on Out of Africa. And so we were there talking about Polyplat. By the way, I have a few copies of this left. It's an academic book. It ain't cheap, but if anyone's interested, I could get it to you somewhat cheaply. Maybe like $20 plus postage, something like that. You could just send me a message and we can see. Now, the news, what you're here for. Following up on the Paul Haggis story, I was just talking about this last week, and it turns out that the jury found him liable in this sexual assault case. And I'm surprised, if you tuned in last week, after recent weeks where he was not found guilty in the case in Italy, and where Kevin Spacey was not found guilty or liable, I guess these are civil trials, in that case in the UK, it just seemed like, well, to be a little cynical about it, things were sort of reestablishing themselves into a sort of pre-Me Too world. But the jury found him liable for $7.5 million, and they also recommended punitive damages. I think in California that's something that a judge determines, so we may hear more about that at a later case. But they decided that he was guilty of sexual assault or rape, again guilty in the civil sense, against the woman Hallie Breest. She's come out and sort of publicly named herself, so I'm not like naming her or anything. And I went through the case a little bit more last week, so I won't sort of rehash that. But I'm surprised, sort of pleasantly surprised. It seems that his reputation however good a writer he may or may not be, Oscar winner, and like how important his sort of breaking away from Scientology and sort of naming and shaming some of the things they do there, how important that might be. He's also at the risk of getting into a little trouble myself, seems to have developed a reputation over the last decade plus of being an assaulter, or at least sexually gross. So this might not be the last time we hear about Haggis getting in trouble for past behavior. We'll see. But I will continue to sort of keep my eye on that trial and see if anything comes from the jury's recommendation of punitive damages. In a similar light, although this is early stage rather than late stage like the Haggis case, Warren Beatty has been sued for, as the headline says, allegedly coercing sex with a minor in 1973. 1973, you say? That was a long time ago. Yes, this is due to a California law that was passed in 2019, and this was in the wake of Me Too, where there was a recognition that in the past, because of, well, patriarchy, but the difficulty of proving sexual assault in the past, that people who had been assaulted, in this case, I think particularly as children, may not have come forth in the past. So California passed this law that's good for 3 years, so I guess through the end of this year, that allows former victims or alleged victims to sue without regard to standard statutes of limitation. So this is the case of a woman named Christina Hirsch. And she says that when he was 35 and she was 14, he paid her undue attention, gave her his phone number, and instructed her to call him when she was near a hotel he was living in at the time. And then slowly sort of groomed her, helped her with her homework, coached her, and ended up having sex with her, which, even if it was consensual, even at the time, would have violated California's statutory rape laws. Beatty hasn't responded yet. If you have read Peter Biskin's biography of Beatty, which I talk about briefly in my shampoo video, Biskin claims that throughout his career, and mostly in the 1970s, Beatty had sex with nearly 13,000 women. Claim Beatty has disputed. But throughout the biography, he describes women, young women, sort of hanging outside his trailer, getting let in. Lots of the relationships he had with women who were younger than him, which is not illegal, but often sort of teens. I went and found an old article that came out after the Biskin book Star, which is a good read, was published, and he's rejecting this number of 12,775 people. And if you read the book, Biskin goes into how he came to this number. Beatty didn't clarify this is from Esquire. Beatty didn't clarify with an actual number, but he also didn't deny sleeping around during his heyday. "Look," he said, "I never misled anyone. And I'm a nice guy. I waited a long time to be married. When you don't get married until you're 54, well, as Arthur Miller said, it comes with the territory." Dude, I don't know where this is going to go. I mean, it shouldn't really surprise anybody that this has happened. I am, if you've watched these videos in the past, you know that I am not the type to say, why did she wait now? She must be looking for something. Yeah. If one looks into the way sexual assault works, then one knows that it is often very difficult for women, especially young women, 14 years old, to make such claims without having their personality, their reputation, and so on attacked. I mean, we see it happening right now with Angelina Jolie, as I've talked about. Certainly saw it happen with Amber Heard. Those were more domestic violence, but still claims against great men. That doesn't mean Beatty did it. These are early days. But it will be interesting to see now that he's, I think it says he's 81 or something like that. Where that goes. And I will certainly keep an eye on that as well. Now for some industry news that's not quite bad dude news. James Gunn and Peter Safran, as you know, I talked about it in a previous video, have sort of taken over at DC or DCEU at Warner Brothers. And they recently announced this week that they're putting into gear the early days or the early stages of an 8 to 10 year plan to create or expand upon the extended universe of DC. As Gunn says, it's the opportunity to make DC as great as it can be and as it should be. Gunn, I think, must be heavily influenced by his time at Marvel, where, as you and everybody else knows, he directed the first 2 Guardians film. According to him, he had quite a bit of input on how the Guardians were depicted in the Infinity War and Endgame films, and also in Thor Love and Thunder. And we know he switched over to DC to make his Suicide Squad and the Peacemaker show, which he's coming back with, but he's also got the Guardians Christmas special and Guardians 3 coming up as well. I mean, this is kind of like what happens in the world of comic books, that writers switch back and forth every few years, not all of them, but many of them, between working on Marvel properties and DC properties. So it's not that big a deal. But I wonder how this will go over with DC fans. I don't know a lot about DC fans. I'm not a huge comic book person or a huge comic book movie person. I do like the MCU for the most part. Some of the films aren't so great, but I enjoy it. Probably, as I've said in previous videos, because I watch it with my kid. I haven't loved all the DC stuff. Like, I'm not a Zack Snyder fan. That's just, the super slow-mo and the heaviness and the sort of persecution complex kind of stuff. It's not my bag. I know it's got a lot of fans, and that's great. Those fans, who I think are a mix of Snyder fans and a certain type of DC fan, I don't know if they love this Gunn and Safran partnership at DC right now. And I don't know, I imagine they'll be somewhat trepidatious about sort of rebooting the Snyderverse. Although, as some of you saw in Black Adam, I won't spoil it in case you haven't seen it, but there's at the very least, a nod, if not more, to the Snyderverse there. So it's interesting to see, or it will be interesting to see, what they mean about this kind of 8 to 10 year plan. Are they going to try again, as Snyder did, to institute a kind of MCU for DC? I think some people, I was saying it before, there were 2 groups of DC fans. I think some of the fans enjoy the kind of, well, Shazam's sitting over here, and Suicide Squad's sitting over here, and Wonder Woman's sitting over here. And yeah, they're all in the same universe, but we don't have to link them together so tightly as MCU, and that allows each of the properties kind of to breathe on their own. I think that's what The Rock was going for when he wanted to separate Black Adam from Shazam. I did not love Black Adam. It's not a good movie, but again, that's my opinion. But at least it's kind of, yes, it's linked to the Shazam world, but it's also sort of standalone. And I think a lot of people like the way that's unfolding with DC. So I'll be curious to see, I mean, and Gunn is part of that in a way. His Suicide Squad, yes, it builds on Air's Suicide Squad from before, but it's also, in a way, its own thing. So it'll be interesting to see how this all unfolds. Of course, nothing yet has been said in these conversations about the previously shelved Batgirl film. And I don't know if Gunn's going to be the kind of guy to bring that back or not. But in this particular press release or press conference, nothing's been said about that. So that's still, for all intents and purposes, in the can. I mean, as in the trash can. A little nice news, I don't know, funny news. Chris Evans is named People's Sexiest Man Alive. Why didn't they do it when America's ass was on screen for all to see? I don't know. Chris Evans is like sort of cutely coy about this. He's like, my mom will be happy. He's like, she's proud of everything I do, but this, now she can brag to her friends. So Chris Evans, he's one of, I don't really pay attention to this a lot, so I just thought this was a funny little news item. But I guess the MCU's been sort of dominating sexiest dudes alive for the last few years. Last year was Paul Rudd. Okay. We have had, who else? Chris Hemsworth. Bradley Cooper. I mean, it's not Rocket Raccoon who's up there. I think Idris Elba was. Michael B. Jordan. So there's been quite a few, at least MCU associated people in there. So anyway, congratulations, Chris. He seems to be a nice guy. So yeah, whatever. He's 41. I did not know that. Somehow I assumed he was younger, but he's been making movies for 20 years, so 20 plus years, so it makes sense. Hold on. A little coffee break. Hold on tight to your drink. Yeah. As usual, ending with a little sad news. The first one's not an RIP, and it's not even really movie news, but I came across this a day or two ago and kind of bummed me out. Former Duran Duran member Andy Taylor misses Rock Hall of Fame induction because of stage 4 cancer. When Duran Duran were at their height in the 80s, and they were huge, if you didn't live through it, they were huge. In my junior high, there was a sort of battle between the girls and boys. It's sad that it was sort of gendered that way. And there was some girls with the boys and some boys with the girls, but it was the girls and boys in 7th and 8th grade. And the girls were into Michael Jackson and Duran Duran, and the boys were into AC/DC and Van Halen. It was the 80s. So, for my 8th grade boy rep, I couldn't really admit to liking Duran Duran. I've said on videos elsewhere that I had a secret love of the Wham song Freedom. Not the George Michael one, which is, there's no secret about my love for that, but the original Wham, I don't want your freedom, that one. I only told my sister this a couple years ago. She was a big Wham fan. She's like, you liked Wham that whole time you made fun of me? I'm so, junior high pressures. But I liked Andy Taylor's guitar playing, and I loved his guitar playing. I mean, it's very sort of 80s production, but in the Power Station, which I think John Taylor from Duran Duran's also in, and Robert Palmer. The guitar tones are really cool on that. I think it's an EP. But some of the guitar, like his strumming and his rhythm, really, he plays some cool solos, but his dynamics, his sort of sonic dynamics on those 80s Duran Duran songs is really wonderful. And as I've gotten older and I don't care what people think about what music I listen to, and I can acknowledge that 80s Duran Duran is really cool, I love his guitar playing. And he hasn't been with the band. He's been back and forth with them on and off since he first left in the late 80s. But he hasn't been with them, I think, since about, 2007 or 8. But he was going to be inducted into the Hall of Fame with them. But stage 4 cancer is hard, and I was really sad to hear that. And the band seems really broken up about it. So best of luck, Andy, going forward. That's a hard one to get over, but stranger things have happened. But if you don't know how good he is, and his first solo album I remember being really cool too. But listen to Rio has some really cool guitar strumming in it, and the tone is just so nice. Hungry Like the Wolf is got some great guitar in it. So check it out and listen to the guitar again and how important it is to the texture of those songs. And John Taylor's bass is like way underrated. Really good bass player. You know, I'm sorry, it's getting personal again, but that's what happens in these videos. Part of my whole I like AC/DC and Van Halen thing was that, oh, the bass and the guitar and all this sort of stuff is so good. And I couldn't admit, you know, because of those 14-year-old pressures, that John Taylor and Andy Taylor are really good musicians. And those songs pop a lot because of those two guys. So, yeah, get well, Andy. And then one RIP that has just come out as I'm making this, and reactions are popping up all over the place, and that is the death of Kevin Conroy. Again, not necessarily movie news, although he did voice Batman in a lot of movies, but he is the longtime voice of Batman. And if you look at the reactions on Twitter from famous people and non-famous people, like, he is Batman. And from the sounds of it, I just missed that sort of 90s Batman show. I was in my 20s and I was too cool for cartoons. And then I moved abroad, as I've talked about in other videos, and didn't have TV for a while. But I've caught up with a lot of it with my son, and it is an amazing performance. All the voice acting on that show is really, really good. Probably all of you are like, yeah, no, duh. But he also seems to have been a wonderful guy from the sounds of it. I mean, everyone who's worked with him and fans who caught up with him at conventions, just talking about how kind he was and generous with his time and always willing to do the voice. You know, some performers who get known for one role can often get resistant to it, but he seems to have understood how important that Batman was to a lot of people, and he embraced it. And one of the things I've really enjoyed looking at this morning, people are putting up their videos from Cameo, you know, the service where you can sort of book a celebrity call or a celebrity video, and Conroy was on there. And people have been posting their cameos from him, or snippets, because they want to keep the private parts. But apparently he had a habit of going beyond the required time and giving people life advice, and just really being generous with his time and his wisdom and all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, rest in peace, Kevin Conroy, the longtime voice of Batman. You brought a lot of joy to people's lives, and that's something that, you know, that's one of the best things we can do in life, is bring joy to others, and he did for decades. So well done, Kevin Conroy, and it seems like the world is going to miss you. So it's a life well lived, at least, and that's something that not everyone who passes can say. Thanks for watching, everybody. This is Movie Talk with Aaron Hunter. I am Aaron Hunter, and this has been The Week in Movies for the week ending the 11th of November. I'll be back next week with more movie news. Until that time, keep watching movies.